Welcome to the Win at Home First podcast. I'm your host, Corey Carlson. This podcast is where we talk about how successful business leaders win, not only at work, but also at home. On this podcast, we'll go behind the scenes with great leaders to hear stories of how they win. Thank you for listening, and on to today's episode. Hello, this is Corey. Today's episode of Will Cox is a great one and packed with humility and honesty. He shares the ups and the downs of his life. The downs include addictions, and at one point, money was so tight they had to sell his wife's wedding ring. All the way to the ups, where he is now CEO of a solar company that is thriving, and the conversation is just packed with nuggets. He talks about humility. He talks about expectations, this idea of listening with your eyes. It is a very good episode. I hope you enjoy as much as I did the conversation. On to today's episode. Hello, this is Corey. You're listening to the Win at Home First podcast. Today I'm joined by Will Cox, who is CEO of Solera Energy. And a few months ago, our paths crossed on LinkedIn, which led to a phone conversation. And on the phone, I was just impressed with his story, which we'll get into during this podcast. But it's a story of challenges and overcoming them to eventually get to this point where he is CEO of Solera Energy. They have, just under 50 employees, a mixture of W-2 and independent contractors. And, solar energy wasn't even part of his past or what he'd ever thought he'd do. And so there's other stories like that throughout Will's life. He is married. He has 2 kids. So he is winning at work and winning at home. And Will, thank you very much for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks, Corey. I appreciate it. Good to be here.
Will, what is that number one trait that leaders need to have in order to win at both home and work?
I think humility, more than anything, in my opinion, is having a sense of yourself, the strengths and your weaknesses, and where you can excel and where you need help at.
How does humility show up in your house?
Don't have all the parenting, something that you can read all the books that you can about being a good parent, or watch YouTube videos or how to overcome, but you don't have all the answers by any means. And so, being able to get on your kids' level, be on your wife's level and come down from, your position of authority as a man in the household, and really being able to understand their needs. And, we make mistakes, and being able to communicate, those mistakes, being open and honest with your family about when you make a mistake, and where you may have fallen short, and where you can be better, and have that real human side that they can, see that dad's not perfect. And, my wife certainly knows that I'm not perfect, but let them know that, hey, we make mistakes, and trying to get better, and always striving to be the man that they hope you can be.
I like how you made the comment about kind of stepping down from your ego from where you're at, because you're CEO every day at the office, and you're been at this company for 4 years, and it's been a growth, continue to grow. And so CEO, you make the decisions running, but if you come home and you operate that way, things don't go very well. Your wife doesn't appreciate it, your kids won't appreciate it. So how do you dial back but yet still be the leader of the home?
It took some time to get used to. It really came down to expectations. I mean, you walk into your home after a long day, and you're expecting your dinner to be made, the house to be perfect, everybody to be happy, the kids are nice. When you have those expectations, you're setting yourself up, you're setting the entire household up for failure. That's not reality. And so if you come in and your first thought is, okay, hey, how can I serve the people in my household when I get home? Where can I help my wife? Where can I, be of assistance, or, show love to my kids? It goes a long way. So nothing is perfect, and understanding, it's having that heart of a servant coming in, looking to help, as opposed to being catered to, makes a big difference in your mindset, your family's mindset, and how the rest of the evening goes.
Is there anything you do to rally or to get your mind in the right spot? Because you're coming home, you're tired, been making decisions all day long. How do you walk in with that additional energy to figure out, hey, how do I serve? How do I love?
It's difficult to do. There's no doubt about it. It's really finding that time to turn off work. You can't have one foot at work and one foot at home, as hard as that possibly is. And it's something that I struggle with. There's no doubt about it. But when you go home and say hi to the family, give your wife a kiss, and you're trying to communicate with them while also still checking your emails, you're physically at home, but your mind is not there. And so you may be frustrated. You're trying to take care of an issue at work that should have been taken care of before you ever walked in the door. And you can take those frustrations out on your kids just because they're happy to see you. You're physically present, but mentally, you're not there. You're somewhere else. And if there's not that clean, okay, hey, it's home time, it's dad time, work is done, and setting those boundaries for yourself, you're going to run into some struggles. Certainly, one of the things that my youngest, the one that's least like, looks most likely, but acts much more like Jenny. Thank goodness. I'd be sitting there on my phone, and he's 5 years old, and he's trying to talk to me, have a conversation. Hey, Dad, listen to me. I said, I am, buddy, while I'm emailing away. And he grabs my phone and says, listen with your eyes. And when that happens, it really hits you. And so for me, it's finding, you almost have to be committed that, hey, when I get in this house, it's their time. And you have to check, just like, hey, we expect our employees and we expect ourselves to check your baggage at the door. Hey, you got to focus, you got to perform, understand there's things going on. You got to check that at the door. You got to be at your job and you got to perform. Same thing goes for when you're at home. You have got to check whatever baggage that you have from work at the door so you can be the best for them. And it's much easier said than it is done.
I love that phrase, listen with your eyes. That is so good. Such wisdom in young kids, isn't there?
Yeah, it hurt. I mean, it sounds cute now, but when he says that, oh man, you're exactly right. Cats in the Cradle starts playing in the background. I mean, I'm just sitting there, my light's flashing before my eyes. Oh my gosh, I'm missing out on everything. And it was golden.
Right on. Is there a hack you have so that you do a good job of checking your baggage at the door when you come in? I mean, do you do a phone in the cupboard? Do you not make phone calls on the way home? I mean, is there just a hack that you found, not that you have it perfected, but there's just something that's working for you that you wish you would have started earlier?
Well, yeah, there's a train that prevents me from getting home a lot of days. And so I would be very angry that this train was delaying my ever so important schedule. And so I made a point that, hey, when that train comes across, I'm going to be grateful for it. And I'm going to spend that time in praise and worship. And so the days that the trains come, believe it or not, is the days that I enter the home in a much better mindset. So as far as, I leave hoping there's a train now, but, it's something that I'm working on, so I need to be better at. There's no doubt about that, to make sure that, I have that pause and I have that reset.
A train example is awesome. We need an example, in your life where you can, when the train doesn't come, you
Right.
can still get fired up. And for me, who doesn't have a train on my commute, but that trigger that it's like, hey, it's game face. I'm running onto the field now. It's a good one, Will. Will, when we had our very first conversation, I loved it. I was kind of on the edge of my seat as you were very vulnerable and sharing battles that you've had through your life, which involved addiction. It involved even your company having some financial challenges in time, and to eventually becoming an overcomer and being strong in your faith, your family, and your employees. And it's one of those stories that listeners need to hear, because we're all facing different challenges. And there's some days we face these challenges, we don't think we can overcome it. And by hearing a story like yours, it's one that gives hope. It gave me hope. I was excited to continue on our conversation. And so I'd love to just have you share some pieces of your story that you think would be helpful to the listener.
Yeah, absolutely. For me, it really comes into two parts: before God and after God. Big passion of mine is being there to help and mentor, young men and youth that are dealing with different things, specifically opiate addictions. And for me, and they ask, hey, how did you overcome this? And what kind of led you on the path? And for me, it's always about, it came down to two things: a great girl that believed in me, and me finally believing in a greater God. All American kid in high school, captain, quarterback, captain of the football team, all the stuff that goes with that. And just a kid that did everything to the extreme. And what drove me in athletics is the same thing that drove me to destructive behaviors off the field. Telling a story, having a good time, staying up late, having an image, all those things are what was important. And how many people knew who I was, how many people could buy me drinks, how many drinks I it was such a superficial image that I had that started off as a good time and ended up into a downward spiral of addiction that almost took my life many, many, many times. And, it was always that thrill of the chase, and everything was to the extreme until you end up spending a decade trying to kill yourself every day. And even though that I never intentionally tried to commit suicide, my behaviors would have told you something completely different, whether it's having your stomach pumped because you take too many Vicodin, whether it's you overdose off heroin. It was bad. And I was on a complete path of destruction. And that was my life. I ended up meeting Jenny 11 years ago. And, she had, after 3 weeks, she had turned down a job that she had coming up down in Florida to stay with me here in Missouri. And it was actually kind of funny. I'm the last person anybody ever thought that would get married. And I mean, I'm still surprised. I love being married to Jenny more than anything in this world. And it was after 3 days, I told her, hey, I know you got this job in Florida. I don't think you're going to take it. I think you're going to stay here with me. And she kind of brushed it off. Well, 3 weeks later, she turned down the job, and she found out it was about a week, 2 weeks later, till she found out how poor of a choice that was. That's when all the facade wore off. That's when she found out that she put her career on hold for a complete and total junkie, somebody that was prone to violence, not against her in the physical sense by any way, but I was not a good person under any circumstance. And there's good people. And then on the far other end, there was me. And it was at that point in time where, I started to make a change. I went to church with her one time, and I kept looking around, and all these people were happy, and I didn't have a belief, the life that I lived and the things that I had seen didn't really have God didn't fit into, a loving God wasn't a character in the story that I saw by any means at all. I was doing well at work in sales. I was doing very well, but completely, I was a miserable person, and I completely just self-sabotage. And it got to a point in time where she said, hey, you get clean, or I'm gone. And for whatever reason, after many, many attempts before, I did. And we ended up, after having some time, clean time under my belt, we ended up getting engaged and got married and had our first son, Liam, when we were in Pennsylvania. God hadn't shown up yet in that till Liam was born. And so that was really when I started searching at that moment in time for God. All of a sudden it clicked, and it was, 7 years ago when I ended up giving my life to Christ. And I always say there's kind of 2 points. So 7 years ago, I want to give my life to Christ. And it was 5 years ago that I started becoming obedient to God. And, that's kind of the journey that shaped me the journey that allowed me to get on the path that I'm on right now in terms of my personal faith.
Incredible story, Will. Thank you for sharing it. in high school, and then you talk about that decade of addiction. Was it a high school injury that got the addictions going? And then in there, was it an identity wreck? I mean, were you planning on, your identity was tied to football, you're going to play college, and then the injury took it and then you went south? Or I guess help me understand, or help us all understand kind of how this started.
Yeah, I wish I was that talented. I was good, but I made up for a lack of talent and speed with heart. So I wasn't going to play big time college ball or anything like that. But it actually started, Corey, and it's a great question. When I was in sixth grade, I was riding my bike and I ran into the back of a parked car and I broke my jaw. And I had braces this time. And if I didn't have braces, all my teeth would have been knocked out. But I had to have 3 reconstructive surgeries, and they actually had to implant a cadaver bone in my upper jaw to support the structure. But you had 3 major surgeries in a period of 18 months. So after the second one, I was in a tremendous amount of pain. And by this time, I'm in 7th grade. My mom went to bed. I'm in a lot of pain. And so I'll never forget it. I had taken 2 additional Vicodin, and I'll never forget the way that it made me feel. And so I look at that. So I had to go through that surgery. Then it was another reconstructive surgery, a major surgery that was 9 months after that. And then a couple smaller surgeries. So I look at the really beginning of my addiction as occurring during that period. And that's what happens a lot of times. And so you've got somebody like me that was a high achiever. I always completely immerse myself in whatever I'm doing. And so, when it came to high school and the drinking, I did the exact same thing. I wanted to be the person that could drink the most and stay up the most and stay up the longest. And so after high school, it switched over to alcohol. I had attended University of Missouri. My last semester, I got a D incomplete and 2 Fs. I got a 0.2 because I was drinking every single day. And after I got kicked out of Mizzou, I came back. My parents have had a restaurant in town, a breakfast restaurant, since January 23rd of 97. I was in charge of one of the stores and having to get up every morning at 4:30 a.m. And, it was hard to do that with a hangover. And that's when I ended up finding a connection again for opiates. And you start with one and you start getting more and more and more into the underbelly of wherever you're at, which is Springfield at the time. And you end up hanging out around with different people, started getting different connections. You're introduced to Oxycontin, move to Kansas City, get in with some very, very, just a rough crowd, to put it kindly. Then you're introduced to heroin, and it just snowballs. And for all intents and purposes, you hate yourself. You want to be different, but your mind, your brain is completely different than when it was before you started using. And so that's how it happened. I mean, it just that combination of somebody that has an addictive personality anyway, with that event that occurred in 6th grade. And, hey, it's a disease. The World Health Organization's define addiction as a chronic progressive disease for which there is no known cure. And so you've just got these different combinations of things that occur, and it's just the perfect storm. And you take somebody that is not raised in doing things like that, and you turn them into a complete junkie. So it just happens naturally over time.
Thank you very much for listening to today's episode. I hope you are enjoying it so far. Before we go back to the rest of this episode, I want to share with you my book, Win at Home First. Some of you have read it, so thank you very much. For others of you, you have not. And I encourage, if you're looking for a resource to help you with these times of your work is now in your home and your home is now in your work, and what this looks like, this book is being helpful to many leaders like you. Forbes magazine said it was one of 7 books everyone on your team should read. And the book is broken up into 4 different sections to help you. First is about you, understand who you are. The second is marriage and ideas and tips to help with your marriage. Third is parenting. and then last is work. So these 4 different sections to help you recalibrate during this time and to help move forward. So if you are needing additional resources, I encourage you to check out my book, Win at Home First. It is available on Amazon as well as Audible. And so on to the rest of the episode. Thank you very much. So now to the current day, you're a personality that goes all in. You want to be the best, and now you're clean. And how do you control that desire to be the best? That control of ambition and just go, go, go. How are you doing that now? Because I know a lot of listeners, we all can struggle with an addiction of work, an addiction of I want to be the best. And so what does that look like in your life, Will? Because that's got to still be around.
Yeah, it's there, but you end up getting enough time underneath you of clarity and wisdom, and you're in business long enough, you're going to get burned in circumstances, you're going to make mistakes. And so really being able to look at the mistakes that you've made in your life, whether it be personal or business, and trying to, hey, fire's great. It can certainly motivate you, move you, and you got to be careful that it doesn't completely burn you up. You've got to have people there that are smarter than you, smart in areas that you're not, or strong in areas that you're weak. And I'm a very self-aware person. In years of struggling allowed me to gain that wisdom and understand that I don't have it all figured out. So, and that's why I talk about humility. You have to know when you're not right. And you have to be vulnerable, and you have to be able to say, hey, I don't have it all figured out. I don't have all the answers. And, empower others to step up in those circumstances and guide you in the right path sometimes.
Do you have a routine that you have every day? I mean, scripture, prayer, what does that look like for you?
I get up early. I love getting up early, get my devotional in, work out, have coffee. And for me, when I do that, I'm in the right place. So it's the same thing every day. We're creatures of habit. And so get up early, 4:45, alarm goes off. You hit your knees, you pray, you read the scripture, and then you're in the gym. And hey, there'll be people listening to this podcast. One of the question that I get all too often is, man, I thought you were dead. Sorry, or thanks. You don't really know what to say. So there'd be a lot of people in this podcast saying, man, but hey, that's what our God does. He breathes life into dead people, dead marriages, dead situations. And, that routine is what, it's not just doing the right things. It's brings joy. That structure is what brings joy into my life.
That has got to put an extra kind of pep in your step when you hear, hey, I thought that you were dead. I mean, yeah, it's embarrassing for a quick minute, but then it's like, I'm not dead. I'm running a company. I've got a team around me. I mean, what an incredible story. All right, Will, I apologize for bouncing around, but there's just a lot of parts of your story I want to kind of keep hitting on at different moments. And I want to talk about the timeline. So how did you go from an addiction, having a successful career at that moment, but still an addiction, and living in Kansas City, going with the rough crowd you'd mentioned. But now today you're CEO of a company that has a little less than 50 people that are working and dependent on the company. So how does that work?
So when I was in Kansas City, and that's before I'd met Jenny, I moved down here, ended up having a career in sales with a Fortune 500 company, and did really well with them. Did well there, and it fueled my addiction that continued on. And it was, I'd met Jenny at that time. That's when I started taking the steps to get clean, and hadn't become a Christian yet, but we moved to Pennsylvania, had Liam there, moved to Chicago, had Chandler there. They're 14 months apart, and came back still with the same organization, Fortune 500 company that treated me really well. And I hadn't became a Christian quite yet. I was still really searching. But when I became it was at that moment in time that I gave my life to Christ. And I look, and it wasn't too much longer that I ended up ended up quitting. It was at that time making great money, and that was all that mattered. That and the title was the only thing that mattered. And I had quit, and when I became a Christian, everything that had mattered previously, all that money, all those titles, all of that started slowly slipping away. And you end up not having to worry about money at all to, oh my goodness, how are we going to pay the bills? And so I was looking for what to do. And me and Jenny were actually down in Mexico on a trip that my parents took us on. We couldn't afford a trip at the time. Everything that I had made with the company that I was at since gone away. I had started a business, and ended up failing, didn't do well at that, and took a significant hit on our personal finances. So I got a call from somebody while we're sitting there out on the balcony. I almost didn't take the call, but I did. And they said, hey, people follow you. They don't follow me. And I want to start this business, and I want it to be a solar business. Would you be interested in starting that with me and bringing your team? And I immediately knew that that's what I wanted to do. It was a yes. I get back in 5 days. Let's talk. For whatever, I knew it. I knew it at that time. So next day, I get a call from my mother-in-law, who is in Houston, Texas, with Jenny's grandma. And Jenny's grandma, passed away this past year. The single most godliest, the closest I've ever been to Jesus on this earth is that woman. And so Jenny's mom gives me a call and said, hey, Will, I just thought I should let you know something. Granny was in her room having prayer time, and she starts getting loud and opens up the door, looks like she's seen a ghost, and said, we have to talk about Will. And she goes, well, what's wrong? And she sits down, and Will, she looks, just borderline scared, but she's also excited, and she tears in her eyes, and she goes, I think he's getting ready to fall into some prosperity. And, Jenny and I had been struggling for 2 years up to that point. And she goes, oh, that's great. And she goes, no, I think it's life-changing prosperity. I had a vision of him standing in a field, and the sun was shining down on him, and money started popping up everywhere. And the sun kept getting brighter and brighter and brighter and brighter until all I could see was the sun. And I said, Nancy, I got a call yesterday about somebody asking me to go into solar. And, Nancy, my mother-in-law, is just completely shocked. And as am I. And she goes, so that's a sign that you need. Jenny and I at that particular time were looking for anything that we could hold on to in terms of hope. And you hear something like that, both of us ended up being in tears and saying that's it. And so end up going and starting that company and the organization, and ended up having success. And it was a year later that dissolved, and me and the group of the sales reps that I've had with me for many, many, many years that stayed with me in the new business that they'd worked for me before. They were in the startup with me that didn't turn out well. They followed me to this new solar venture and got educated and learned, and we had success. And it was after a year being in that organization that I had a meeting, and that's when Solera ended up being formed. And when I was talking to Jenny about it, everything was such a God thing that happened. And I'm talking to Jenny, and I said, hey, in order for this to be successful, I've got to have somebody like Ryan McDonald, who had lived 4 doors down from me, who was a vice president of a logistics company at that time. And I go, I've got to have somebody like him. And she goes, will he ever leave the business that he's with right now? I said, no. Well, 4 days later, I'm at his house talking to him, and he goes, I'm thinking about leaving the company that I'm with right now. And I'm like, wait, what? He goes, I'm thinking about getting another job. And I'm freaking out. And I can't hardly get the words out. And so it ends up being, I'm just shocked. And so, God has that plan, and you just got to get out of the way and allow it to happen. And that's when he ended up coming on board and it was all those things that brought Solera into place. Now that didn't mean we started off and just we just start printing money. It didn't work that way. It was actually quite the opposite. Our struggle, the struggles that we went through when we started this company, are the reason that we're successful today. That's when we were able to really dial in on our procedures and our process and find two things. It was 8 months in that I hadn't taken a paycheck in quite a long time. We're obviously still dealing with the financial fallout from the years of not making money. The savings have been depleted. College, all that had gone away. And, we're selling everything. I mean, Jenny is just selling everything. And it ends up, hey, we've got the choice. Do we take money from this company and the existence of it will be questionable, or do we sell her ring? And we sold her ring. And for her, it was the equivalent of somebody else selling an old TV. She doesn't care. That stuff didn't matter to her. It mattered to me. And it was our boats were burnt. When we started this company, we didn't have a choice but to be successful. And we ended up turning it over to God, and he put all those things in place, and he allowed the struggle to happen, and we were able to learn. And it was really sitting there after she had done that I sat back and I looked at her and I looked at my kids completely different. And all of nothing mattered but them. And I was so filled with joy. They talk about peace that passes understanding. I didn't know why, but I was content in that situation. And somebody that has an ego like I do, and a lot of us do, to have your wife go through that it crushes your ego when you feel like you failed your family as a provider. It's a tough situation to be in. But despite all of it, I was in a situation that I was at peace with it, and I was at joy. And it was right about that time that the wheels started turning. And that's when we go from a group of people, selling solar, into a organization that is in its current state that it is right now. I always talk about the 127 men, women, and children that rely on this company to put food in their mouths every single day. And we've been able to go from that struggle. That struggle is what has built us into the organization that we are now. And the story that I always think about is caterpillar struggling to get out of its cocoon. And a little boy comes and cuts them out. And the butterfly doesn't, the wings never take form. They have to struggle in the cocoon to develop enough blood flow so the wings are strong enough to allow it to fly. And that struggle, as hard as it was to go through, that struggle, those Jenny selling her ring, those times of worry set the foundation for the company that we are today. So I know there's a lot there, and probably gave you more than you guys care to know, but it's a amazing thing. It's a miracle that we're here and we're stronger today than we ever have been.
I've heard parts of that story before, Will, and each time I hear it, it gives me goosebumps. I mean, it's an incredible story of perseverance, as well as just God's restoration in each of our lives, your guys' marriage and the company. What are you hearing from God right now?
Be in the moment, be in the present, and make the most out of what you're doing right now.
That's a good word. The stories that you've had, getting knocked down, getting back up, there's just got to be this courage and boldness that you have going forward as you lead the company and lead the family.
Yeah, it's certainly, I talk about providence and having the hand of God over you to protect you, and having God's favor in every situation and battle that you go into. And there is that confidence. You start getting that swagger about you in your situation, and you're able to go in. You're exactly right. I mean, it creates momentum, and it becomes very contagious. And when you know that God set the plan forward, you just have to go through. You have to do the right things. You work hard, and things are going to be taken care of. There's certainly confidence that you have, and a comfort that you have going about your daily life.
It's that Hebrews verse lived out where, faith is the assurance of things that are hoped for and the conviction of things not yet seen. You've seen so many moments of your own life where it's like, I don't know how I'm getting out of this. But yet you have gotten through it. So it just gives you that faith for greater things to come.
Yeah. My favorite scripture is, 1 Peter 5:6. It's humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, in the right time he will lift you up in honor. And the two things that really stick out to me, and that is first thing I talked about, humility. That confidence I just talked about, have to be careful, not to walk in your own confidence or accomplishments. And also at the right time he will lift you up in honor. And so we want everything to be on our timeline, and we want things when we want them, and that's just not realistic. So, being humble, being patient, and turning towards him is what it allows us to keep going through the day.
That's powerful, Will. Thank you so much for today. Thank you for your vulnerability. What's the best way for listeners to get a hold of you, whether it's for Solera Energy or just to talk or learn more of your story, your wisdom?
Yeah, feel free to email me. It's Will at Solera, SOLERA, Solera Energy LLC.com, or you can go to soleraenergyllc.com.
Will, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah, you bet, Corey. I appreciate it.
I want to thank you for listening to my podcast, Win at Home First. I am so grateful to hear from listeners like you that this content has been helpful. So now I would love for you to pay it forward. I want to get this message in the hands of more listeners. We need leaders to be winning both at home and at work, especially during this time. So please take a minute to share this episode with somebody you think would find value in it, as well as rate and subscribe. As a thank you, please visit my website at CoreyMCarlson.com to download a free resource that people are finding value in. Thank you very much.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.